Welcome to this week's episode of The Formula. I'm your host, Trevor Carlson. On The Formula, we break down and explore the elements of achievement in world-class performers. This week's guest is Colin Wright from exilelifestyle.com. Colin has spent 8 years traveling full-time around the world. He shares some stories from being in a Bollywood commercial, what it's like to date someone while you're living the full-time traveling lifestyle. Colin really goes deep on a lot of different subjects, why you should be doing what you love, how to really get into the flow of writing, why you should only start projects if you know you are going to finish them, and much, much more. Colin's definitely one of the more interesting people I've had a conversation with, and I really look forward to sharing it with you. Without my rambling anymore, let's get this thing started with Colin Wright.
Something that's always appealed to me is, full-time travel. I've done, I don't even know what you'd call it, maybe extended vacations where they're maybe 2 months long, but I haven't pulled the trigger on a full-time commitment yet, but it's very appealing to me. So
it's definitely a different creature. I don't know. I think for a lot of people, different versions are probably more ideal because you do give up a lot. There's a lot of trade-offs with full-time travel that for people, I know people who travel like 6 months on, 6 months off. They have home bases and they take every other weekend off and go somewhere. There's a lot of different models, all of them with pros and cons. The full-time travel thing makes a lot of sense for me because I am addicted to, I'm probably not addicted to, but I thrive on novelty and to a certain degree discomfort and valuable frictions. That's what really kind of sets me alight and gets me in a creative space. But for a lot of people, frankly, they would not enjoy what even people who really like travel, they'd be like, why the hell do you travel this way? Why do you do it to yourself? But for me, it's super great. It's super, it's uncomfortable in a valuable way, which definitely encourages growth.
Oh yeah, totally. I know what you mean when you say that like discomfort promotes creativity. Because I've been doing this interim like COO thing for a startup here, just trying to help them get some processes in place, and I've had to go into the same office almost every day for like the last month and a half, and I'm like, oh my god. Like I want, like, some days I'll like head over to the library, or I'll head to just like a different city that's within driving distance and just like find a library or cafe or something, just because it's stepping into that different zone or different place. For some reason it just seems to slow everything down, and I just feel like I get into like a state of flow really quickly then.
Yeah, well, there's neurological reasons for it. Your brain is looking for threats and opportunities when you're in a new space. So you actually do perceive time differently, and you're collecting information differently. You go into kind of a narrative state where you're paying more attention to the sensory information around you because it's actually looking for threats. It's saying, okay, what could kill me here? Whereas if you're in a place that you're familiar with, it tries to save energy. It goes into kind of an automatic, autonomous state. And that's why you could drive to the same workplace over and over every day. And sometimes you'll just like come to consciousness in the parking lot, not remembering how you got there, not because you weren't experiencing it, not because you were driving in an unsafe way, but because you were kind of on autopilot. That's your brain saving energy. Whereas if you're in a place where there might be threats because it's unfamiliar and all the noises around you and the smells around you and so on are unfamiliar, then your brain is biologically incentivized to pay closer attention.
What got you into, or why did you start traveling full time?
It's something that I've always wanted to do to some degree or another. But it was always a distant plan. It was something, or I had in the back of my head when I got into entrepreneurship. I started my first business when I was 19, and from there it kind of spiraled the way it tends to, with people who are very invigorated by that type of challenge. And my goal at the time was to make like $1 million by the time I was in my mid or late 20s, and to retire young and then to go off and travel, because my perception of things was that I needed essentially what amounted to infinite dollars in order to travel. I needed a crazy amount of money to do it because that's what it is. It's a luxury that you have to pay a crazy amount of money for. And I wanted to do it because I was becoming increasingly aware that I was really quite knowledgeable about certain things I could read about. I've always been a voracious reader, and I was pretty good at business and I was pretty good at academics. So the worlds that I had involved myself in, I was good at. But I was also increasingly aware of how utterly ignorant I was about so many facets of life, just real world, street level stuff, beyond being a middle class white dude in the United States. And that's like a lifestyle that is very often portrayed within fiction and stuff too, because a lot of the people who create this fiction are from that lifestyle. So I couldn't even get like a really super well informed fictional version of this that I could empathize with and really start to understand from a distance. So I was becoming aware that I needed to just get the hell out and go experience some of these things if I was ever going to have a rounder, more informed view of the world. And that was my idea of how I needed to get out there. Thankfully, it turned out not to be the case. I realized partway through my stint, the several years that I spent out in Los Angeles running a branding studio, that although I could stay with it for the long haul and try to earn that crazy amount of money, and there were actually a few opportunities on my plate at that point that put that milestone within view, that earning my $1 million and retiring young. But at the same time, I was looking at all the mentors that I had at that moment, and they were all 100 millionaires, billionaires, like super grateful for the information that they provided me with and the opportunities they provided me with. But I also looked at their lives and realized that they all had dreams like this. They all had things that they wanted to do, and they never did. They never stepped away from that hamster wheel, in part because it's somewhat addictive, in part because of the investments that you tend to make. They incentivize you to stay within that work hard, play hard lifestyle. And I had no reason to believe I was any more capable or more smart, like no smarter than any of these people who were my mentors, who never stepped away from that and who said, I need $1 million. They earn that and then say, okay, well, now I think I need 10. And now I think I need 100. And now, $1 billion would be really great.
Yeah, it just keeps going.
Yeah. It was a flywheel effect. And so I figured, if I don't step off of this hamster wheel now, I probably won't. I know enough about myself to know that challenge will be invigorating and interesting, and I'll never do this thing that I tell myself that I really want to do, that I think will help me grow in a completely different way than I have in the past. And so I did. and that's what kind of led me to where I am today, where travel's a huge focus of my life.
Yeah, you brought up a couple points as you were talking there that I'm really curious on. And that's one is the perception that you need an unlimited amount of money to travel. If someone was, getting started today traveling, what do you think it would take for them to, I mean, your story is probably a little bit different than someone that's just getting started, but how would they go through that process of figuring out how much money they needed to get started traveling?
It really depends on several variables. Part of it is debt. A lot of people have a lot of debt for a lot of different reasons. A lot of them are infrastructural reasons that are not really anybody's fault, depending on how you look at it. But I was very fortunate to be able to pay off all of my debt before I left LA. That was one of the big decisions that I made. Do I want to have more money in the bank just in case, or do I not want to owe anybody anything? And I decided to pay off that debt. So that made it a whole lot easier. That said, a lot of people will be smarter about travel than I was when I started. I was throwing a whole lot at the wall. I didn't know exactly what I was doing. I'd never left the country at that point when I started traveling full time. So some people who have done it before will make smarter decisions and won't need as much. Some people, too, will be a lot more comfortable just staying at hostels or couch surfing. There's very inexpensive, in some cases free, ways to do a lot of these things. I decided to rent flats all the different places that I've traveled to. So my expenses were significantly less than LA. My entire lifestyle today costs well under half just what my rent cost out in LA. So,
Wow.
You can save a great deal of money and still live a nice lifestyle in different places depending on where you're going. But you can do it like really, really cheap too. You can do kind of the gap year student method where you spend as little as possible. You have less privacy typically because you're staying at a hostel or sleeping on somebody's couch. But you can do it. If you really want to travel on a budget, you could cut your expenses down to $300 or $400 a month, depending on where you're going, everything in, and still have a really great experience. Now, that said, different people prioritize different things, and for me, a lot of the stuff that I enjoy doing doesn't tend to be super crazy expensive. But if your priority in life, if the thing that makes you happier than anything else is racing yachts, your expenses will be higher than my expenses, because yacht racing is not something that's on my radar. It's not very important to me. But if that is something that's super important to you, that is worth considering. You shouldn't issue that just because it's expensive. You should figure out a way to do it, and to do it in such a way that you can continue to make that sustainable financially.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like based on what your lifestyle choices are, it's going to be a little bit different based on each person.
Yeah, and your existing financial situation, like I said, paying off debt is a really great thing to consider doing before you leave, so that it's not a stress point. It's not an additional expense each month that you're trying to handle from dozens of time zones away. That could be a real stressor that you don't want to have to deal with if you can avoid it. And then being somewhat entrepreneurial certainly helps. It helps to have an idea or a framework for thinking about money in terms of, if I'm spending this much, I need to bring in this much. It's a really, really basic concept. But if you spend less than you earn, however much you happen to be earning, then you're good. You're in the black. And being able to restructure your thinking in that way means that you could significantly cut your costs and have to work essentially not at all, depending on what you're doing. And that will open up a lot of opportunities that you might not have otherwise had.
Yeah, that probably sounds like a great idea on paper to, have enough money in the bank to not have to work while you're traveling full time, or do incremental sprints, I guess, of work while you're on the road. How long have you been traveling for?
Since 2009, so wow. eight years-ish.
Wow. That's crazy, man. That's awesome, but it's just like that seems like a very long time to be on the road.
It really, really is. Yeah, it changes the way you look at things. If you do anything long enough, it becomes a little bit normal and seems a little bit strange to do anything else. But yeah, it's still the type of thing that I look at my life sometimes and think, oh my God, I cannot believe that actually worked.
What do you think the biggest takeaway you've had since you've started traveling is?
Oh, there's been a lot in a lot of different sectors of life. One of them that I was heartened to see was true, that I suspected before, but now I can say with authority, or with some authority at least, is that in general, we all have a whole lot more in common than we have differences. And we tend to fixate on the differences for a lot of reasons, particularly because there are people, particularly up top, in charge of things, that want us to see each other as different, because that makes us easier to organize and to rule and govern. But in general, everywhere you go on the planet, people have the same or very, very similar concerns and goals and hopes and dreams. The specifics will be different, but in general, you can go just about anywhere on the planet and find a whole lot of shared priorities.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because it's, you meet people all the time, and I'm sure a lot of them just, want to take care of their families or have aspirations or goals just like everyone else. But that's got to be pretty eye-opening to see that as you're traveling around, though.
Yeah, well, and to see all the different iterations and manifestations of it, too, because it does look different depending on if you're in a place like Reykjavik or, a place like the Congo. It's going to look substantially different. But at the same time, it's the same general principle, just manifesting in different ways based on the local traditions and the local economic circumstances and so on.
You mean everywhere that you go, they're not trying to get the newest pair of Jordans, or get their Facebook page up to 1 million likes or anything like that?
Not necessarily, but the local version of that, like in some places, the local version of 1 million likes on Facebook is like being really popular within the village. So there are similarities, and if you can learn to scale and rescale things based on where you are, then you generally have a pretty good idea of what's going to be important.
Yeah. Do you see yourself stopping traveling anytime soon?
Probably not stopping. I've been iterating. I've been changing up the the diagram that I use, the plan that I use for things. I typically, for most of the last 8 years, I've been doing 4 months in a country before I move on, and my readers then vote on my next country, and I choose the city. About a year ago, I decided to change that up a little bit and try something new, in part because I hadn't stayed anywhere longer than 4 or 5 months for something like 6 or 7 years at that point. And it terrified me. The idea of having to buy furniture terrified me because I've been living for the majority of what I consider to be my adult life. I left when I was 24. I'm 32 now. So for 24 until 30, essentially, I hadn't bought furniture. I'd lived in furnished apartments and reshaped myself based on local circumstances rather than having any hard set priorities or preferences. And the idea of having to buy a desk for myself or having to own a car was just this ridiculous fear that I had because it seemed like such a tether and like a really deep root system that I didn't want. And at the same time, I was looking at what was happening in the US, and there's a lot of facets of what's happening in the US that I don't understand right now. And I mean that politically, I mean that infrastructurally, I mean that like just in terms of pop culture. People will tell me about this new singer, and I have no idea what they're talking about. So I decided to come back to the US and do a year apiece in a couple different places that I hadn't lived before. And the first place that I chose was Wichita, Kansas, because it was like one of the most exotic places I could think to go based on my past experiences. I'd never lived in a place like Wichita, Kansas, a place where it's a very libertarian version of conservatism that exists there, but there's still kind of like a small, interesting hardware-based startup scene, which was kind of interesting. And then I had my readers vote recently on what my second state should be, and they voted for Tennessee. So now I find myself in Memphis, doing again a slightly different version of the travel thing that I've done before, where I have furniture and I have different types of relationships, but at the same time, it's still kind of a step into a new place that you haven't been before, figure out what it is to live here, what's unique about this place, and so on.
Do you have a favorite place that you've been to?
It really depends on the metric. It's hard to choose. Like my favorite place to go to write is Reykjavik, Iceland, and especially during the winter, I really love the chilly, windy, snowy type of environment, and Reykjavik is great for that. Missoula, Montana is a close second in terms of a nice, chilled out, culturally friendly place.
That's not what I was expecting.
Yeah. Oh man, I love Missoula, Montana. It's super great. And it has a similar climate part of the year to Reykjavik, actually. And it's similar too, in that culturally, everything is very friendly and inviting and welcoming. It's not challenging in the way that I typically like to experience challenges on the road. Generally, people are just super friendly, regardless of what you believe, regardless of your politics, whatever. People are chill with each other. But in terms of being challenged and in terms of encountering valuable frictions and having essentially everyone around you think differently than you, look differently than you, act differently than you, have completely different goals than you, have completely different life experiences from you. Like Calcutta, India, was a super valuable experience and a place that I can't wait to go back to again in the future.
Yeah, what do you think made it such a valuable experience for you?
Well, like I said, just so radically different from everything I've ever done or experienced. And you definitely, the people there are so friendly, and the government is incredibly corrupt, and the concept of what makes a person wealthy or poor, the concept of what makes a person good and bad, there's a lot of underlying similarities, but the physical manifestation of it that you see day to day is so different. And just different being polite, ways of being polite are different. Like staring at somebody is not at all weird or impolite, and standing right up in somebody's face is not at all weird or impolite because it's so crowded there. And just little things like that, little day-to-day things where people are dying on the streets of things that have been cured in the United States for generations. I saw dead bodies all the time. And I saw like polluted streams because they were just, when I lived there at least, they were just entering kind of a styrofoam revolution where everything was suddenly plastic and styrofoam, the way it kind of was in the 80s and 90s in the US. And so seeing things like that and seeing different groups of people deal with those problems in different ways and having different ideologies around it was really, really fascinating and challenging at the same time.
Yeah, that's got to change your perspective on a lot of things, though, seeing those kind of things over and over again.
Yeah. And it makes you realize, too, how similar we are, even if we're at somewhat different points in terms of commercialization and in terms of different facets of capitalism, of globalized capitalism that most places have adopted at this point. But also in terms of how we deal with it, how India is going to come up with solutions that we totally missed. And we've done some things, I think, that they could probably benefit from as well. So there's a lot of potential for cross-pollination in all these different places that you can't help but notice as well.
Yeah, I imagine so. They probably have a lot of different backgrounds, experiences, and a completely different perception on stuff. That'll be interesting to see how the commercial world responds to that. Do you have a favorite? So I know you've done a ton of traveling. You've been all over the place. You've probably had some really interesting experiences. Do you have a favorite story that you like to tell from your travels? Whether if you're like having dinner with some new folks.
Oh, God. It's always hard to even know where to start with that. It's something that usually comes to mind, actually, because it's so ridiculous. I was in a Bollywood commercial.
Oh, my God.
I was a cowboy in a Bollywood commercial when I was living in Calcutta. And they initially tried to make me a Michael Jackson, one of two Michael Jacksons, but the pants were too tight. Like they were like little boy pants, I swear to God, these were pants made for an 8-year-old. And they tried to fit me in them. And I struggled and couldn't fit. And the tailor was like evil eyeing me the entire time as if I was doing something wrong, not being tiny enough to fit in these little boy pants. But it was a commercial for a local TV station. And we were shooting at Nico Park, which is like an off-brand Disneyland, where they've just ripped off all of the intellectual property of all the other theme parks in the world. And so there's like a tiny-eared Mickey Mouse, and there are like 5 off-brand Power Rangers, and 2 Michael Jacksons, and a Lawrence of Arabia, and me, the cowboy, and a couple of friends of mine who were there. One was a genie, and one was like a Mayan princess. And they put us all together and had us dance these Bollywood dance moves in front of a giant fire-breathing flower. And just everything about it was so ridiculous and over the top. And like 17 hours later, shooting deep into the night, because it was, I think it was like monsoon season too. So we had periodic torrential downpours that we had to go seek cover for like, 10 or 20 minutes. And then we'd go back out and shoot some more. And everything about it was so strange. And they paid us like $40 to go out and do this. But the experience itself was so surreal that it's almost like taking something, some hallucinogenic. And then afterwards, you're questioning whether or not it actually happened. But then periodically, you see little photo evidence pieces from it throughout the internet. So, yeah, so that experience stands out to me as something truly bizarre and interesting and fun, and something that probably wouldn't have happened if I was in the U.S.
Right. It sounds absurd, but it's got to be an interesting experience, man. I can't even imagine. I was imagining you dancing around and God, all those people in front of a fire-breathing flower.
and now I know that, if I ever need to, I can dress up as a cowboy and dance crazy dance moves and get away with it. That's a second career track in case I ever want to take it.
Right. Just in case you want to make a living as a commercial actor, you can always fall back onto that.
It is nice to have options.
Right. So if somebody approached you, which I'm sure they do all the time, and asked you what are the first couple steps to get started traveling full time, what would you tell them?
The first thing that most people overlook, that they completely bypass, in fact, for a lot of different life choices, but for this in particular, I would say, is to take a step back from everyday life. Take a step back from what you're doing, from what you're thinking about, from what your goals are, and just look at the big picture for a moment. Like really set aside some time to do nothing but look at that big picture. and truly allow yourself to consider it for the first time. Like, am I actually doing what I want to do? Is that thing that I think I want to do what I want to do? Or is it like a sexy thing I've seen on Instagram? Is it like a cool thing that sounds great on paper? And I perceive myself as the type of person who would do that and be happy doing that. But would I really? Like, it's something that I remember from my LA days, is that a lot of people perceived themselves as living these actor lifestyles and going out and partying all the time and being wealthy, but kind of like blowing it all on booze and fancy outfits. But in reality, like, if they're really being honest with themselves, they kind of just wanted to stay inside and read and, learn to cook and indulge in creative activities. That other part of the lifestyle was something that they were sold on by a lot of marketing dollars from a lot of different brands that were telling them that this is what they're supposed to do. But in reality, their ideals and priorities were elsewhere. So taking the time to figure that out, whether the goals that you have, the vision of what could be, if that's your goal or if it's something that's been sold to you. And there's a lot of different actors out there, not actors, not in terms of acting, but people participating in that side of things, of trying to convince you of things, that are very, very good at their jobs. And there's no shame in stepping back from a goal that you think you have and instead reverting to something that is actually more aligned with your philosophy and priorities and ideals. So take the time to do that, because it'll save you a whole lot of time and effort and money that you might otherwise spend running full throttle at a finish line, only to get there and to realize that you were on the wrong racetrack the entire time. Having done that, having actually figured out what you actually want to do, and if you do actually then want to travel or to make some other major life shift in that direction, take a look at the boring numbers. Allow yourself to take the time to figure out what your expenses will be, where your income is coming from. I can't tell you how many people I've met on the road who left everything. They quit their job as like a lawyer or something and said, yeah, I'm going to go off and do this thing. I'm going to finally fulfill my dream of training horses in Argentina or something. And that's great if that's your dream. But if you haven't figured out the financials of that yet, a lot of those people that I met had to go home after 3 or 4 months because they ran out of money, and they had to take a job that was worse than the one that they initially left, because they cut a whole lot of ties. They broke away from that thing they were doing before. And ideally, like, there's nothing wrong with changing course if you figure out that this thing that you wanted to do is not for you. But if you have to change course because you ran out of money, because you can't sustain it, that sucks. And you don't want to find yourself in that situation if you can avoid it.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be the worst, where you're like, man, I'm really enjoying this, but now I didn't plan, so I have to turn around and go back.
And it's so unfortunately common. And there's a lot of unknowns when you do something like this. Like, you can't know how much you're going to be spending specifically each month, but you can try to stick to a budget, and you can figure out different ways to earn income. And it's not fun to do that. And you definitely won't want to do it once you get out there, because there's be so much novelty and so many new people to meet and so many new foods to try and so much that you want to be doing and involving yourself with. And it's an even bigger bummer to have to step away from all of that wonderful new information and those new experiences, to have to deal with that. So the more you can get done ahead of time, the better off you'll be.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I'm gonna paraphrase a tiny bit on what you said earlier about the, are you being sold a lifestyle, or are you doing something because you really want to do it? Do you think part of that is, or a part of that could be, people want to maybe escape from something that they're doing right now, and travel just seems like a good way to do it?
Yeah. And travel is like a more literal type of escape than a lot of other escapes that you might engage in. So yeah, I think it's the difference between running from something and running towards something. Ideally, you set your goals, you set your eyes on something that you're running toward, something that you want to be experiencing, as opposed to looking at where you are now and saying, I need to get the hell out of this. And this thing looks sexy and fun, and it's way different from what I'm doing now. It may be that you just need to take a small step to your left or to your right. It may be that a small pivot would actually be a better fit. Maybe you actually do enjoy what you're doing career-wise, but your lifestyle needs a slight adjustment. You need to spend more time on X, Y, or Z. You need to carve out more of your weekend to spend on this passion that you haven't been spending any time on, something like that. There's a lot of simple solutions that, if they would actually be the better choice, it's not as dramatic and it doesn't look as sexy on Instagram necessarily, but that might be the better choice. And it's good to figure that out ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanna bring something up that I read in, I don't know if it was a blog post or where I saw it, but you had talked a little bit about what it was like dating while traveling full time. Do you want to go into a little more detail on that? Like because I think that's fascinating. There's, a lot of people struggle just, holding a normal relationship with someone down the street. And I can't imagine what it's like to try to do that while you're traveling full time.
Yeah, it can be tricky. There are a lot of additional considerations that you have to work into the equation. But in general, something that I've realized with that too, it helped clarify a lot of things. I ended up writing a book called Some Thoughts About Relationships because there are some general principles, I think, that apply no matter what your relationship looks like or what your intended relationship looks like, no matter who's involved, how many people are involved, no matter what the circumstances, if it's like a marriage track type of thing, if it's a polyamorous constellation, like there's no right or wrong way to do a relationship so long as everyone involved is getting what they want out of it and is fully informed. And with that in mind as like a core structure, then it becomes a whole lot easier. And you become a whole lot more aware that you don't have to be true to a certain set of tenets or a certain structure or a certain framework, a certain blueprint for what a successful relationship is. Some of my best relationships have been short term, and we both knew that, hey, I'm leaving in 4 months. And is that cool? Is that something that works for you? Is it okay if this is not leading toward marriage? Is it okay if this is not leading toward forever? And being able to look at something like that and say, you know what, it actually is. I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying spending time with you. I like what we've got going. Let's let this be whatever it will be. And if both people or all people involved can say that, then you're in a good place. Now, there are bad ways to do that too. If you know that you're leaving in 4 months and the other person does not, or if you imply that it might be going someplace different than it actually is, then that is not a good way to enter a relationship. That's a really great way to hurt somebody that you care about. And ideally, what you do and what you start with, no matter what you're trying to build, is making sure that nobody gets hurt, that you leave the other person better than you found them, and that you ensure that everybody's getting what they want out of the situation, whatever that happens to be.
Yeah, those actually sounds like just good relationship advice in general.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's what I've come to realize. Like, it became a lot more clear because I've had to do some fairly unusual types of relationships because of the nature of my fairly unusual lifestyle. But it really does apply, and it applies beyond romantic relationships too. Like, you could apply those same tenets to friendships, to business relationships. Like, be communicative, don't be a douchebag, make sure everybody's on the same page, communicate clearly, and be aware that you can structure it however you want. You don't have to be beholden to traditional ways of doing things. And that tends to result in better relationships all around.
Yeah. Are there certain parts of the world that are open to that idea than others?
Yes. I tend to... Dating is a much bigger part of my life when I tend to be in bigger cities, when I'm in urban environments, when I'm in coastal environments often, compared to places that are far more conservative, compared to places that are more religious. Here in Memphis, actually, it's a very religious place compared to a place like LA or New York or Chicago even. And consequently, dating is not high on my priority list because for a lot of people here, people tend to get married very young. They tend to have kids very young. Traditional relationships and traditional ways of doing things are parts, or more typically, integral parts of what people want out of life. And consequently, like going out on a date and saying, hey, so here's the deal. I'm leaving in a year. What's up with you? Is not as likely to result in something where everybody would be happy with the situation. And so, that that doesn't mean that everybody feels that way, and it doesn't mean that it's a no-go. But some parts of the world, like in India, it was the same way. People do relationships very differently there. In Argentina, to a certain degree, even in a big city like Buenos Aires, dating is very different there, or at least when I was living there, it was, than other places. So, yeah, it really depends on where you're at. It depends on what you're looking for. For me, kind of a shorter term open relationship type of thing typically works best, and that's definitely not everybody's cup of tea. Whereas if you're traveling but you are looking for a long-term relationship, and you're looking for something, maybe somebody to travel with, or looking for somebody to date long distance or something, then you could still have a much better, or a much wider audience, I guess, for that type of thing, a bigger selection of people to choose from, even if you're traveling.
Right, and I'm thinking about how it actually, like, what you're doing, I feel like isn't necessarily a bad thing when you're like, oh yeah, I'm leaving in a year, because really, I mean, in any relationship, it could end pretty much at any point in time. So it's like, why does it, I guess to me, I'm just thinking, like, why does it matter if you're leaving in a year if it ends up, you never know where things will go. So
that's true. A lot of people don't like to look at things that way. A lot of people don't like to invest in something, or really commit themselves to something, unless there's the potential or the expectation even that it's forever. And that there's a lot of issues with that, potentially. That's a much bigger conversation, so I won't get into the weeds with it here. But to me, a better way to approach it is to say, let's let this be what it will be. Does this fit in with how you want to spend your time, energy, and resources? Is this a viable way for you to be spending your time? Is this a good investment, even if it's not a forever investment? I tend to get along best with people who look at it that way and say, we should make this an even better experience if it's finite. If we know it's going to end, that's all the more reason to enjoy every single moment that we have with each other. But again, that's my priority. It's not everybody's priority. And people, I think, ideally will get what they want out of relationships. So there's no real point of trying to convert people to your beliefs on that thing is kind of not a good idea, I think, for multiple reasons.
Yeah, absolutely, because they're not really being genuine with what they want. They're thinking that something might change in the future or whatnot.
Yeah. And people should get what they want. If what they want is different from me, well, that's no different from most of our goals in life, I think.
You said something there that I feel like is a really good analogy just for life in general. If you know it's finite, then you should, enjoy every moment you have with that person even more. And it's like, man, that's, for some reason, that's really sticking with me, because it's like, and this could be a very deep rabbit hole that we could definitely go down. But if life is finite, then, people should be really making a point to enjoy every moment to the most that they can, right?
Yeah, that was one of the core principles that led me to leave LA. I realized that, I could always make more money. I knew I could do that. I knew, worst case scenario, if everything went sideways and this proved to be an unfruitful adventure, I could go back and I could start over and I could do it again. But I could never get my 20s back. I could never get my 30s back. And looking forward into the future, if I continued to spend my time doing things that I didn't want to do, or at least things that I didn't want to do as much as this other thing that I wanted to do, that was time I could never get back. No matter how much money I made, I could not buy more time. And to me, consequently, that seemed like the more important resource to try to save, to try to earn back more of my time so that I could spend it on whatever I wanted, as opposed to earning a bunch of money that could not buy me that time.
Yeah, I think that's a great life lesson, man. A lot of people focus on, myself included, there's been periods of time where, you focus on like, oh, I need to make more money or do this and that. And then the next thing you know, it's like a year or two later and you're like, oh, well, I have a little bit more money, but I actually don't really know what happened over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Well, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with money, but to earn money for money's sake usually is just a way of keeping score. And it's turning into a game something that should be a much broader adventure than that. It's turning life into a game. I know a lot of people who enjoy entrepreneurship and business just for the sake of it, and I enjoy aspects of it for the same. But if you look at the bigger picture, and if you consider what money can do for you, as opposed to just using it as, a scoreboard that happens to be in your bank account, you're trying to earn the larger score. Look at it as a resource that you can trade for other stuff. It's actually amazing how little most of us need to actually get the stuff that we want, that's bigger, that we want beyond just that higher score. And again, some people, it will be more money that you need to do the stuff that you really are passionate about. But for a lot of people, it's not expensive to go off and do these things that you're waiting to do. And if you can figure out a way to earn just enough, to earn enough money to pay the bills and to have a decent lifestyle, you free up so much of that extra time that you would otherwise be spending on that empty metric of just earning more money for the sake of earning money. And it's not something that's a popular thing to say, because we are taught that earning money makes you good. It makes you smarter than everyone else. It makes you better than everyone else. But at the end of the day, that really is a metric that very seldom correlates with those other traits. And far more frequently, the people who are really, truly enjoying themselves, and the people who are not burning out, and the people who are living lifestyles that very closely align with their actual priorities and philosophies and beliefs, those are the people who are earning enough money to pay the bills and to not be stressed out about money, but they're not earning a crazy amount of excess above and beyond that, or at least not right away. It's not something that is their fixation and focus, that they're putting off life in order to do.
That's going to take me a minute to process all of that, because that's some good stuff. Well, I'm processing that. Let's jump over to a little bit of your writing, because as you were saying that, I'm like, oh man, I was just thinking about some of my own stuff, and I'm sure some of the listeners will be doing the same, where they're like, damn, maybe I need to be thinking about some of this a little bit differently.
That's an easy thing to fall into. I mean, I still do it. I'm heavily focused on doing the stuff that's really important to me. But every once in a while, I still get that little pang of like, man, it would be fun though to do like really well in this industry just for the sake of it. Let's scale this business, even though you don't have to, even though there would be negative consequences to it, because then it will earn you more money that you can then spend on what? And then typically, if I ask it in that way, I realize that I don't even know what I would spend it on, because I've got the stuff that I want. I'm able to do the stuff that I want to do. But every single force in our life, well-meaning people, like our parents, our schools, our heroes, all of them are telling us, earn more money and you're a better person. And they're doing it not to hurt us, but because that is the metric that we use to judge success. And it's unfortunate, but if you can recalibrate things in that way, it typically leads in much better results in much better outcomes.
Yeah, it's like the hustle as hard as you can, so someday you can have it.
Right.
So let's jump over to some of your writing a little bit, because I find a lot of the stuff that you've written to be really interesting. So what would you say is the most meaningful piece you've written?
Oh, it probably depends on when you ask me. My most recent book is called Becoming Who We Need to Be, and it's a collection of essays that it shows the connection between small individual choices and larger scale societal choices. And that's probably my favorite, what I perceive to be my most meaningful piece right now is that collection, because it connects so many of the things that I've been fixating on. The ability for us to, kind of like what we've been talking about, to look inward and to act with intention, to understand yourself well enough that you're then able to align your actions with your beliefs in a really substantial, meaningful way, and how that scales up, so that then we as societies, as communities of any size, begin to make better decisions and prepare ourselves for the challenges that we're facing today and that we will face in the future.
Yeah, I'm about a third of the way through that book, and I'm really enjoying it so far. It's really, really interesting. I'll save some more of my comments until I'm finished, but I'm enjoying it definitely so far.
Oh, thanks very much. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, no problem. Why did you start writing?
I've always been a big reader. I read voraciously. I'm a total book nerd. I worked at an indie bookstore for 5 years, and I did it. I wasn't earning it was like minimum wage, less than minimum wage probably, because I had to get a work permit to start working when I was 15. So they were paying me very little, but I got all the books at cost was the idea. And I consume books so voraciously. But I told myself most of my life that I'm a reader, not a writer. And then in high school, I tried my hand at journalism and really enjoyed it, particularly news analysis, basically reading something, figuring out what's going on, why it's important, doing some additional research, and then helping other people understand why those things are important, why they should give a damn about it. And that kind of led to everything else and in fact, at each step along the way, I told myself that's not something I do. That's not something I can do. Writing is not something you do. You're a reader, not a writer. Writing long form nonfiction is not something that you do. That's something that you read. You can't possibly do that. And then I try it and I enjoy it. And writing fiction is not something that you do. You are a reader of fiction. You are not a writer of fiction. So each step of the way, I had to kind of overcome that initial hurdle of doubt and telling myself that I couldn't do it, that I am an appreciator of these things, not a doer of these things. But then each step of the way, thankfully, it proved not to be the case, which it actually kind of consequently led to the state where I'm at now, where when I find myself telling myself that I can't do something, I say, well, that's probably something I should try. I'm probably going to be doing that professionally in a couple of years.
Yeah, writing is so important when it comes to just being able to, communicate and relay your thoughts, especially now. I feel like everything that we do kind of rotates around your ability to write or to communicate whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're selling yourself, selling something else, social media, all of that stuff, blog writing.
Yeah.
It's something I wish I'd have started on much younger, but I think it's a lot of fun to do at the same time, storytelling and all of it.
Yeah, especially if you look at it as an opportunity, both to get better at understanding what you're hearing or reading from other people, but also to share things that you think are important. And those tools that you mentioned are a lot of our most important modern inventions are things that amplify our ability to communicate clearly or more widely or more effectively or in different ways. So, social media, smartphones, like a lot of the stuff that we have, a lot of these methods of communication are amplifying what's already there. So if you can become better at it, then all of these tools become more useful, and they tend to amplify then more valuable information as opposed to more noise, because unfortunately they amplify the non-valuable stuff as well, which we're seeing a lot of repercussions from that.
Oh, totally. Maybe just a couple.
Yeah.
What's your creative process, or your writing process like?
It's a little non-standard, and it's changed with each book I've written, I think, which tends to be the longer duration writing projects. Blog posts and things, I have a thought and then I write them. So it's a very short process. Then I give it like one pass for editing after that. Writing books, typically I'll have like the seed of an idea and I'll jot down a note about it, and then I'll have over the following days or weeks supplementary concepts to go with that, ways to express it, ideas that connect well, perspectives that might help people understand what I'm talking about or help me understand what I'm talking about. And I make kind of an outline of that, kind of a spinal cord for what I'll eventually flesh out into a full body of a book. And once I've got that all outlined and I've got some notes jotted down for each kind of chapter and sub-chapter, then I'll usually sit down and just over the course of a week or however long it takes, just 8 to 16 hours a day, just sit down and knock it out till it's done. I'm really bad at letting unfinished projects just sit there. So I know I won't be able to think about anything else clearly, and I'll be totally horrible in social situations until I can finish that book once I get it started. So I don't let myself start actually doing the writing until I know I have enough of a runway in order to actually finish it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good trait. A lot of people, well, myself included, occasionally, I like to get started on a lot of things, but, for me, only the really important ones are the ones that actually get done. I get started on a few, and then a little ways in, I kind of decide that maybe it was more of a good idea in my head or as a pipe dream than actually like finishing it. But I think that's an awesome trait. How did you develop that?
I think I came to associate at some point completing things, whatever it happens to be, because this is definitely something that spans all of my habits and projects. Completing things I came to associate with just a really pleasant victory type experience. And then in addition to that, and very importantly, it gives me momentum that then I want to start something new, and I want to use that energy to create something. And I feel that like surge of adrenaline every single time I complete something. And so understanding that, then I'm able to use it. So if I'm not feeling particularly motivated, I'll go do the dishes or something, some easy victory. And then I feel a surge of completion and a momentum, like, okay, now what else can I kick ass at? And so I'll do the dishes and then go, write a blog post and then use that to finish up some other project I need to do. So somehow tethering completing things, getting something out the door and off my plate with victory and success and psychological reward. Somewhere along the lines that came to be. I'm not sure exactly where. Probably back at the beginning of my entrepreneurial days. But making that connection and allowing yourself to really feel it when it happens, that seems to keep that percolating.
Yeah, sounds almost like the concept of stacking wins, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. So you recently started a podcast as well. So man, you just have like a laundry list of stuff that you're doing all the time, it seems like. So it's from the outside looking in, it just seems like you get an immense amount of stuff done. I realize it's all taken place probably over the course of 8 years, but still.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And then again, I have essentially 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to spend on whatever I like. So if you use your time well, and if you're doing things you really enjoy, every single thing that I'm doing for a living right now that I earn my income from are things that I would be doing even if I wasn't making a cent from them. So the books, the podcast, the blog, the speaking engagements, these are all things that I would definitely be doing even if it was just for kicks. So that combined with having all of my time to spend on these things, it really, really helps you produce a lot of stuff. It helps you scrap a lot of things too. It helps you do a lot of things that end up not being good ideas and that end up being just fun as opposed to things that actually make it out the door for other people to make use of. But yeah, it's a combination of things, that and, as you mentioned, doing them over the course of 8 years certainly helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, I'm hoping that I can take a few things away from this and increase my own productivity level, you might say, from some of your habits or behaviors that you've picked up over the years.
Yeah, well, it helps if you're doing stuff you love, man. So if it helps, it definitely is a good trait to be able to do things that you do not enjoy, to be able to just muscle your way through it and just grit your teeth and say, I'm going to finish this, and to do it. That's something I learned very early, because that's also a skill that then applies at the difficult parts of the things that you do love. Because writing, for example, sometimes it is a joy, but there are aspects of writing, particularly for me, editing, the editing process where you have to work through the book that you just wrote like 7 or 8 times to rework it and fix all the stupid flubs that you make. It's like being beaten across the face with a hammer, just over and over and over again. And you get so sick of your own writing voice and your own ideas, and by the end of it, you never want to see another word that you have written ever again. And the same is true with podcasting, where by the time I'm done editing and producing the thing, I'm just so sick of my own voice. I cannot stand my own voice. But being able to muscle your way through that is super important, as above and beyond just being able to fill your life with things that you enjoy doing without having to break a sweat.
Yeah. I can relate to the podcasting thing because I've done some editing of my own, and by the time I'm done, I'm like, man, why does anybody listen to this again? Yeah. So that kind of leads us into a little bit some of the more rapid fire questions that I wrap up the show with. What does your daily routine look like?
There's no consistent one. And that's been necessitated because of all the travel where I don't know what infrastructure I'll have. And in some places I go, there's like the call to morning prayer at 5 a.m. every morning. And so that tends to wake me up. In other places like Iceland, people don't wake up until 10. So my schedule is very flexible. Here in Memphis, it's been a little bit more set in that I typically wake up, do some exercises, some very, very light exercising in the morning, sit and think for like 10 minutes, just doing nothing, have some coffee, check the email, get a few difficult things done, like things that are not enjoyable that I know I need to get done. Getting those out of the way in the morning typically helps, and helps propel me into what I want to do next. And then it's really unstructured. I'll go out and explore the city. I'm learning to cook and I'm learning to play piano right now, which are two additional projects in addition to producing other music and doing all the stuff that I do for a living. So the rest of my day is usually a mix of trying out new recipes, and further improving my cooking skills, working on piano lessons that I'm kind of self-guiding, just playing guitar and singing for fun. That's something that I've been doing for ages that I enjoy. And then some type of writing, some type of playing around on social media, seeing what I can share that might be valuable for people, reading a whole lot. Just trying a bunch of new things. I like to mix up my day and keep it interesting and have a few things like piano practice that I can predict that are the framework for the day. But then everything else, I like to keep it pretty mixed up so that I can surprise myself.
That way you have a little extra excitement in your day.
Yeah. It's I don't know, having that anticipation, but then also having that novelty. It really does kind of jolt you out of any autopilot that you might find yourself drifting into. And so I like finding myself at the end of the day, knowing that I've done a lot, even if it's been, sitting around and reading all day, that's still doing a lot. And being able to look back on that and remember the moments and not feel like my day just disappeared and not knowing where it went. I love feeling like I had a long day full of interesting things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I know the feeling that you're talking about. One of the biggest things that I found was the difference between a long versus short day is how much time I spent on like my mobile device or my laptop.
Oh my God, it's a time suck, but also a consciousness suck. Like you might come up from your phone after an hour and not being able to remember a single specific thing that you did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's weird when you like disconnect from it and either grab a book or for me it's like notebook for journaling or writing, and I just leave my text somewhere far away where I can't get to it easily.
Yeah.
And then the amount of stuff that I feel like I get done versus when you have that instinctual you want to grab your phone and like check to make sure like, oh, did I get a response from that email, or did I get a text back from this person on this thing? And when you don't have that opportunity, I don't know. For me, it makes a big difference. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's amazing that we live in the times that we live in. We have so many amazing tools. These technologies are wonderful. I'm not an anti-technology enthusiast. I think analog methods are cool too, but I think smartphones are one of the most incredible inventions that we've had in the modern age. They've enabled so much. They have leveled a lot of playing fields. The powers that they grant us are astounding. But what's important is that we use them on purpose, that we use them intentionally, that we know why we're using them, that we don't let them use us instead. And just like all of those marketing messages I was talking about, notifications on your phone are just debilitating because that allows the apps to manage you rather than you managing the apps. And if you can, every time you pick up your phone, know why you're doing it, then it grants you superpowers. But if the phone itself draws you in and controls your actions, and there's a lot of very intelligent, well-paid people making these apps that their only job is to move you around like a marionette to get you to interact with things. If you can avoid that, and one of the simplest ways is just to turn off all the notifications on your phone, then you're in a great spot. But if you allow it to become a time suck, then it's like turning your superpowers into kryptonite, unfortunately, because it really is an incredibly potent time suck if you allow it to be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. So for all you listeners out there, put down your phones and go do something without tech.
Yeah, use them intentionally. Use them, but use them intentionally.
Right, absolutely. What would you say? Yeah, you said you're a voracious reader, so this one's going to be, I feel like this is going to be an interesting question for you. What's the most impactful book that you've read?
Oh, I'll have to change it to read recently because there's just so many amazing, influential books, influential on me. Recently, actually, there's a lot of good nonfiction ones that I could answer with, but I'll give a fiction one because a lot of people do not see the value in fiction above and beyond entertainment. And they are entertaining, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Fiction allows you to, it's like a workout for your creativity and imagination. It allows you to empathize. It allows you to see the world from different angles. And one of the best books, but really it's the first book in a 3-book series for that purpose for me recently. It was a book called The 3-Body Problem that was recently translated from Chinese. It's by this guy who writes Chinese science fiction. And it's essentially about Earth, and we kind of accidentally, kind of not, tell some aliens where we're at. And they basically tell us, hey, we're coming to destroy you. But the distances are so vast that they won't arrive for like 400, 500 years. So what happens then on Earth in the 400, 500 years that we're waiting for destruction at the hands of this other civilization? It makes these amazing points that I had never considered before about technological superiority in terms of military conflict. A lot of popular science fiction is like spaceships and lasers, and you've got like the upstart, technologically non-sophisticated humans fighting the aliens, and we're kind of equal though because we're clever. Well, if you do not invest in basic material science and basic physics research, then actually you may find yourself facing off against an enemy that there's literally no way you can hurt them, and their smallest device could actually destroy your planet. So having that perspective was amazing. Having the Chinese perspective on the future and on cooperation and on protagonists and antagonists was very fascinating as well. It raises a couple interesting theories about the way that we deal with interstellar space as well, and the way that we perceive travel, the way that we perceive those technologies, the way that we interact with our fundamental physics and other research of that type. Super, super fascinating on multiple levels, in addition to just being a beautifully written, highly entertaining book. And again, it's the first book of a 3-book series. So The 3-Body Problem by what's his name? Liu Cixin, I think, Cixin. Super great read if you have the opportunity. It's super dense and mind expanding.
Yeah, you just sold me on it, so I'm gonna pick that up.
Oh, dude, you will not regret it, man. You're gonna be. And the 3rd book was just, maybe 3 or 4 months ago translated to English. So the entire series is now in English, which is wonderful.
I'm assuming you're a Kindle guy then, since you travel a lot.
Yeah, I love paper books, and for some books, particularly like photo books and books on design, I still prefer the hardcover, but it's not practical for me to travel with it. So my Kindle Paperwhite is one of my prized possessions that I travel with.
I kind of figured with that, and I couldn't agree more on the actually holding a physical book. There's just something about it where you can actually like write in it and take notes and like circle things where you can't necessarily do that on a Kindle.
And you can hand it off to other people too, which is really nice. That sharing component, particularly when on the road. I can't tell you how many times I've been handed a random book from a random stranger that they just finished, and they just want somebody else to have it, to read it. So that traveling library component is something that's missing with the ebook revolution, but it's nice having a really high quality in terms of usage. Like the device itself is super light and super legible, and it has a built-in book light. Super great for that purpose, and super great because you can carry just hundreds of books on it and not have to worry about it.
Yeah. Man, I feel like we could talk for hours about a lot of this stuff. I want to be respectful of your time though. So I want to say thank you for taking the time to sit in on this interview with me today, and I really appreciate it, man. I've got a lot of takeaways, and I hope that everybody tuning in also learns a couple things, or maybe they get inspired to maybe take another trip or spend more time doing what they love.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Great talking to you.
Yeah, no problem. Do you have anything that you'd like to leave the audience with? Maybe a shameless plug or something that you're going to be working on and releasing here shortly?
Well, the podcast is called Let's Know Things. If you're interested in taking in my weekly news analysis, usually like an hour or so per episode podcast, My blog is exilelifestyle.com. My author site is colin.io, where you can just Google Colin Wright and a bunch of stuff will pop up, probably way more than you want to know. And then I just encourage people to remember that, you do have just this one life. You have a very finite number of days, hours, seconds to spend. And every day, hour, or second that you spend on stuff that is not aligned with your beliefs, that is not what you want to be doing, is a day, hour, or second that you'll never get back. And whatever that happens to mean for you, act accordingly. You use that knowledge however you will to move you or not in the direction of something that might be better aligned with what you'd like to be doing.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is a wrap. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Formula. And like Colin said, be sure to check him out on any of those different resources, such as exilelifestyle.com and the others that he listed off. If you would be interested in getting a short email every week or two from me that has on it book recommendations, some ramblings in the form of blog posts, and some other stuff that we'll be releasing, whether it's guides, online courses, stuff like that, go ahead and head to helixacademy.co. Also, if you would be so kind, you know the drill. We're looking for reviews and ratings from you, our listeners, so that way we can continue to grow our audience and to rise up on the iTunes ranks. So if you follow the link below in the show notes and head over to iTunes and provide us with an awesome review, if you think the show's awesome. I mean, review it however you'd like. Just a review would be great. We would greatly appreciate it. Until next time, I'm Trevor Carlson, and I look forward to sharing the next formula with you.